Hello everyone, it's Hoplite Mike. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to discuss Third Age Total War, arguably the most successful Lord of the Rings mod of all time, as well as one of the most famous mods in Total War history. With over 2 million downloads of the final version from ModDB, it dwarfs any other Lord of the Rings mod in terms of popularity, and its 9.7 rating, as well as 14 first place finishes in the Total War Center Mod Awards, is testament to the high quality player experience. 13 years after its initial release, the mod is still being used as the basis for various widely played submods, such as Divide and Conquer and Third Age Reforged, which again speaks to the impact it's had on the Total War community. Having said that, it wasn't the first Lord of the Rings mod, and also wasn't without its problems. So let's do a deep dive into what made it one of the greatest modifications of all time, and discuss what it has to offer. The initial version of Third Age was released in 2009. It was the first Lord of the Rings mod created for Medieval 2, however there were other mods already out for Rome Total War in 4th Age and LOTR. The distinction between Rome and Medieval 2 as the base game does have some relevance here, as Tolkien's universe is closer to a medieval setting, so I think it's fair to say that Medieval 2 would seem like a more appropriate basis for a Lord of the Rings mod. That's not to say it's true in practice, as there are fundamental gameplay differences between Rome and Med 2 unrelated to time period, such as the recruitment system, pace of combat, and introduction of the town-castle mechanic. People will have their own preference on which they like better. However, the general consensus is that Med 2 has a few more features, which modders can take advantage of. Regardless, version 1 of Third Age was released in April 2009, and has 300,000 downloads on ModDB, which was not dissimilar to the stats of the latest version of LOTR at that time. A year later, version 2 was made available, and was downloaded 482,000 times over the course of its life, about a 50% increase compared to the first version. It saw the addition of the Arnor forging script and a Fellowship of the Ring campaign. It would then be another year and a half before version 3 was released in December 2011, and then just over 3 years after the initial version was made available, the 3.2 patch was released in June 2012, and this became the final version of the mod. While I appreciate there has been some unofficial continuation, and also various submods that continued past this date, the last official version of Third Age Total War as a standalone mod was 3.2 in 2012. Version 3 has over 2 million downloads on ModDB. To put that into perspective, Third Age is the third most popular mod of all time on ModDB, and that encompasses mods for every game, not just Total War, and other popular Medieval 2 mods usually don't get above 150,000 downloads. I appreciate the 2 million figure is slightly inflated, as there will be a lot of re-downloads in there, and it's used as the basis for so many submods. However, judging by the download figures for those submods, I don't think it's as inflated as one might think. Let's move on to what it has to offer in terms of gameplay. The final version has 13 factions, reflecting the various powers of the time. Each faction has fleshed out rosters featuring units recognisable from the films. The Middle-earth map has over 100 settlements. There are custom models for the prominent characters, and unique siege maps for the significant locations of the age. Almost every semblance of the original Medieval 2 Total War has been overhauled with a full Lord of the Rings themed UI, and there are complementary clips from the films to increase this immersion further. The mod actually features 2 campaigns, a heavily scripted Fellowship of the Ring campaign, which includes the Lord of the Rings storyline, as well as various side quests for Fellowship members. The second is the main general campaign, which starts 40 years before the War of the Ring, and has a broader focus on the Third Age as a whole. I'll be mainly talking about the general campaign for the purposes of this review. As a quick run through of the factions, we have the prominent kingdoms of Gondor and Rohan, as well as the free peoples of Eriador and city-state of Dale. The elves have been split into two factions, the High Elves in the west, and the Sylvan Elves inhabiting Lothlorien and Mirkwood in the east. The Dwarves, on the other hand, are combined into one faction that has territory in the Blue and Iron Mountains on opposite sides of the map. And then we move on to the forces of evil. Mordor, Harad and Rhûn in the east, two orc factions covering the Misty Mountains and Gundabad, and lastly Isengard in the middle of the map, which also encompasses Dunland. The makeup of the factions means that certain distinct groups of people are combined into one faction, such as the Lothlorien and Mirkwood Elves united into the Sylvan Elves, and Dunland being incorporated into Isengard. However, as a first stab, I think this does accurately reflect the powers at the time, and provides plenty of variety for gameplay purposes. Additionally, investing a lot of time into creating a separate faction like Dunland may not have been worth it, given it likely wouldn't have been a popular faction. As for the Mirkwood Elves, we didn't really see them as a separate entity until the Hobbit films, which came out after the final version of this mod, which likely contributed to them being grouped in with Lothlorien. Most factions are led by characters that we know from the films, such as Denethor ruling Gondor and Elrond the High Elves. However, due to the fact the campaign starts 40 years before the War of the Ring, there are some differences. Rohan, for example, is led by Thengel, who is Theoden's father. The mod team have tactfully used the corrupted Theoden, the portrait for Thengel, and in line with the films, Mordor is led by the Witch King instead of Sauron, who only spawns as a general if the ring is obtained. Most factions play quite differently and have scripts to supplement the campaign. For example, the Free Peoples of Eredor have the opportunity to become the Kingdom of Arnor if certain conditions are met, which then gives them access to special Arnorian units. The requirements themselves are fairly demanding, in getting a House of Kings in the former capital Annúminas, as well as conquering specific regions, which can lead to declaring war on a fairly good faction to conquer them. While it can take a long time to get there, the Arnorian units do look stunning. Its fellow former Númenorian kingdom Gondor also has several scripts. Each leader of Gondor is named a steward. Aragorn will arrive sometime after turn 70, where you can either accept or decline him as a general. If you accept this, it will lead to the steward being undermined and developing negative traits to reflect this. Due to constraints within Medieval 2, Aragorn can't be incorporated as faction leader when you accept, although this is true to the story, as he didn't immediately become king when he came to Gondor. From a roleplay perspective, I do like the option to bring him into the faction. While the Gondor campaign is already very difficult, the scripted Corsair invasions leave the southern coastline permanently at risk, and the only way to prevent this is to either take Umbar or make peace with Harad. On the other hand, playing as Harad means the invasions will work the opposite way, with Gondor raiding your western coastline. Additionally, there are some scripts as part of the campaign that affect every faction. For example, if you own the Shire settlements, this allows you to grant autonomy to the hobbits, which means you can't build or recruit units from these settlements, but it does yield benefits such as quick building roads and providing supplies to your generals, giving them more movement points. The autonomy mechanic also works with Fangorn. If you control this region as a good faction, you can accept giving them autonomy, and this will provide you with Ent units from time to time. However, if you are an evil faction and conquer Fangorn, then the Ents go to war script will trigger. See the rebel force led by Treebeard here. The autonomy scripts are a minor feature, but it's a good way of reflecting the fact that both places were quite independent and operated on their own in the story. The Ents also give you a troll equivalent for the forces of good factions. There is also a complicated script for the Palantirs, which are housed at 4 locations on the map. Taking control of a settlement with a Palantir allows you to see random sections of the map that are under the fog of war every 5 turns. The player has the option to view locally around that settlement or anywhere on the map. However, doing so can lead your user to develop negative traits as Sauron begins to corrupt them. It's not something I used a lot, as only one person in your faction will have the retinue which allows them to use the Palantir, and that requires them being garrisoned in that settlement. However, spotting an enemy army can be the difference between keeping and losing a settlement. For a faction like the High Elves, which have the Palantir in the far west, in Elistirion, I wouldn't say it's particularly useful for them because that settlement is rarely in danger, so the local view is not going to show much, and then viewing random parts of the map can be quite hit or miss. However, I do need to give the modders credit for implementing the Palantir into the campaign in a way that fits with the story, because in the films they do say that the Palantir can give you a glance into the enemy's plans, and that's effectively what it does in this mod. The Balrog has also been included in the mod. Laying siege to Moria will awake the Balrog, and he will join the garrisoned forces defending the mountain. This significantly increases the difficulty of taking this settlement. And finally, the Army of the Dead script, which can be used to obtain the ancillary. Having covered most of the scripts, we're now going to move on to invasions, one of the main features of the mod, designed to recreate the united attack that Mordor and its allies led on Minas Tirith in the films. Invasions work in the same way as Crusades from the base game, with Sauron effectively being Pope, spawning around turn 50. As one of the evil factions, you form part of Sauron's Dark League, and once you have enough favour, you can call an invasion. This will unite the evil factions on a single target and helps beat some of the more resilient factions. I like the creative implementation of invasions, although I have noted that if an invasion gets called, it's almost impossible to defend a specific settlement, and you will have to deal with stack after stack as you divert resources away from your other frontiers. Next, we move on to the biggest script of them all, the Ring script. If you are a good faction, the Ring will pop up in a succession of evil settlements, moving between each after a number of turns have passed, and you have to capture the settlement it's in to take possession of the Ring. In the game files, there is a specific list of places it can appear. Once you have it, you will be instructed to attend the White Council, where the fate of the Ring will be determined. In practice, this means going to one of 3 settlements: Rivendell, Mithwand, or Caras Galadon. At the White Council, you will be given the mission to destroy the Ring in Mount Doom, which in turn will destroy Mordor. This means your general standing next to Mount Doom for 5 turns while in possession of the Ring. If you decline the mission of going to the White Council, or just don't attend, the Ring will usually be stolen from you after a number of turns have passed. If you attend the White Council but decline the mission to go to Mount Doom, then the White Council will take the Ring from you. Alternatively, if the Ring passes through 7 evil settlements without you being able to capture it, then it will go to Barad-dûr and Sauron will regain the Ring and spawn as a general. I like the way the Ring mission has been incorporated into the campaign. It follows some of the actual events from the books in taking it to the White Council and then being sent on a quest to Mordor to destroy the Ring, while also enabling you as a player of any forces of good faction to take part in the Ring destruction and form your own fellowship. The only real issues are that the Ring can spawn in settlements quite far away, and taking it to the White Council once you've acquired it requires a decent sized army to protect the Ring and a significant number of turns to get there. This takes at least part of your forces away from your front lines and weakens you against your neighbours. This isn't necessarily a criticism, as it is basically an additional quest that requires you to manage your resources accordingly, but there will be campaigns where it's just never realistic to go for the Ring. I think the mission to attend the White Council once you have the Ring could have been implemented as an accept decline decision where your general just goes off map for 5 to 6 turns and then comes back to you, and that would mean you wouldn't need to divert a large number of units to accompany them to the White Council. Lastly, if you are in a position where you can stand outside of Mount Doom for 5 turns, then you've probably already destroyed Mordor, which does defeat the point of destroying the ring. Conversely, if you are playing as a faction of evil, the ring will pop up in a succession of good settlements. Your task as the evil faction is to capture that settlement to acquire the ring, at which point Sauron will demand it and you have 25 turns to take it to the Black Gate. If you are playing as Mordor, you will need to take it to Barad-dûr. If you fulfill this mission, then the ring will pass to Sauron and he spawns outside of Barad-dûr as a general for Mordor. If you don't take the ring to the Black Gate in the 25 turns allocated, then the evil factions will declare war on you and you will lose the protection of Sauron. In gameplay terms, this means you are excommunicated from the Dark League. Again, I like the way this works on the evil side, although I would note if you are playing as one of the Orc factions, taking the ring to the Black Gate is no easy feat, given that you'll have to make your way through Rohan or Gondor to get there. In regards to the unit rosters, there is a wide variety of troops, spanning the early game tiers to the late game elites, with a good transition between the two. For the first 40 turns, you're restricted to early to mid game units, until the military event happens, which will give you access to the highest tier of the barracks, and therefore your best units. There is also specific regions that give you access to unique units, which can be seen in the location info panel. The armor designs from the films are well implemented into the mod. For example, the visually impressive High Elves from the Battle of the Last Alliance, and the Sylvan Elves that come to Rohan's aid in the Battle of Helm's Deep. There is even the inclusions of the Ents, Trolls and Spider units that we know from the books. From a unit roster standpoint, the modders have done a fantastic job, and I don't think you'll be disappointed in this regard. The only point people have made is they stopped short of implementing the Fell Beasts, which are in some other Lord of the Rings mods. However, this is partly due to limitations on the implementation of those units. Certain other areas where the team really excelled themselves is in the settlement design. Each location that we know from the films has been adapted as well as possible for the mod. This can be seen in places like Edoras, where Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli meet King Theoden, Helm's Deep, which is attacked by Isengard in the Two Towers, and Minas Tirith in the final film The Return of the King. In places like this, the attention to detail is incredible, and even the surrounding area replicates the look from the films to further increase the immersion. Going through the custom battle setup shows just how many battle maps have been designed for the mod. Fighting in these locations is certainly the high point in the campaigns, for me at least. Despite the overwhelming praise the mod received, it wasn't without its complaints. The pace of the campaign is definitely on the slower side, and this appears to be a deliberate design decision. This is not necessarily a criticism, as some people will prefer the arguably more realistic slow pace, but it won't suit some players. It takes a long time for settlements to upgrade, and often towns and castles that start off small never reach the higher tiers, even in longer campaigns. Additionally, the culture mechanic means settlements have to be converted before being able to recruit units, requiring further resources and time. As a result, getting to a stage where you can recruit elite units from more than 1 or 2 starting settlements can take a prohibitively long amount of time. It seems to be designed so that there will be a small number of important large settlements to give you access to your best units, and then the remainder of the map restricted to mid-tier countryside-like settlements. This also increases the risk in campaigns, as losing a full stack can put you massively on the back foot, given it can take a large number of turns to raise forces and get them to the front line. Moving on to Conquest, there are auto-garrison scripts that trigger when you attack certain settlements, which effectively just generates a large number of enemy units when you lay siege to a specific settlement. This does increase the difficulty, but arguably turns the campaign into a bit of a grind, as you aren't rewarded for outmaneuvering the enemy when they get bailed out by free troops. Furthermore, there are last stand scripts which auto-generate units under specific circumstances, like a faction falling below a certain number of settlements. These scripts are particularly apparent when you're trying to finish off a faction on its last legs, as they are relentless in raising new forces. I wouldn't necessarily criticize the modders for these scripts. It's been done with a specific goal in mind. Firstly, it means you can't just rush the enemy in the early game and destroy a neighbouring enemy faction before they get a chance to get going, as you won't yet be able to fund sufficient armies to deal with their multiple scripted stacks. It also means the AI always has troops in the most important places, enabling it to better keep hold of its key settlements when it is not intelligent enough to do this itself. In general, it just means enemy factions are protected from being blitzed in the early game, and means you have to build yourself up economically and militarily before you can seriously take them on. Nevertheless, it can be frustrating when factions refuse to die. The next point is on economy, which can be a challenge to manage. Focusing on economy buildings in the early game is almost essential. Furthermore, declining most generals that are offered to you to keep wages down, moving the capital and constructing war buildings to manage corruption, and balancing the population growth with tax rates are all important aspects of keeping the economy afloat. I've found the economy to be under the most strain in the mid-game, when you're trying to kill off enemy factions and you need sufficient gold to fund enough units to deal with the scripted stacks. Even in the late game, corruption can be crippling, as you start conquering places further and further away from your capital. This mod certainly pushes you to learn the finer aspects of the Medieval 2 economic system. The challenging economy is definitely something that keeps me engaged, because when money is too easy to come by, the campaign can get boring as you can afford unlimited units. All the previously mentioned points about slow growth, limited recruitment, the auto-garrison scripts, and challenging economy are linked. The mod is designed to be as difficult as possible. You are forced to invest in the economy in the early game, and it takes a long time to build up a sustainable income and multiple armies to be able to kill off other factions. At the same time, the enemies are protected from being taken out by the auto-garrison scripts. This gives the AI time to build up, so by the time you get to them, you have a battle on your hands. This forces the player to learn all aspects of the game. You need to micromanage your economy, maneuver yourself politically, and win battles against all the odds. It's for this reason that the campaigns often take 200 to 300 turns. Overall, Third Age Total War was a fantastic mod, and if CA had built this and sold it as a full game, I wouldn't have known the difference. That in itself is the greatest praise I can give it. However, its real greatness came from the foundations that it laid for the future. The mod built the Middle-earth map, created the base factions, and designed the units that we know from the films. But it wasn't without its problems, and in many ways, development ended prematurely. Third Age Total War essentially built the platform for future submods such as Divide and Conquer, Third Age Reforged, and DCI Last Alliance. Divide and Conquer in particular expanded the number of factions, added more units, introduced more scripts, and Third Age is the reason we have that today. For that reason, this mod has earned its place in the Hall of Fame in Total War history.